Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Believe in Mavs with Mo Murphy. As always, I'm your host, Mo Murphy. And your Dallas Mavericks won game one, and now they are on to game two. And there was no better person to bring on than a Mavs content creator himself, Jericho from the Mavs Chronicles Film Breakdown. Jericho, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. I do appreciate you for coming on this platform. So we're gonna cut right to the chase. So you break down film. You break down film like no other, especially I would say no other. No disrespect to anybody in the Mavs space, but the way you break down the film and the way you do your thing, I respect it. And so it would be great to have you on, talk about what you saw in game one, and also how it'll translate into game two. For those listening, you'll be hearing it this morning. The game will be played tonight. So Jericho, I'm gonna just you kind of gonna carry this show a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So I want to start. What were some of the biggest things for game one that you saw on the positive note for the Dallas Mavericks on the offensive end? What was like a major key to their success in winning game one?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest key was keeping Anthony Edwards contained. I talked about it going into game one that we're going to single cover him and we're just going to kind of live with the results. One thing that stood out, I knew we weren't going to let him get in the paint. 5 of his 6 made field goals were actually from 3-point range. So he had 1 2-point field goal. He basically didn't get to the rim at all the entire game. And I thought that was probably the number one key, was just keeping Anthony Edwards in check. And the Mavs did that. They guarded him with Derrick Jones Jr. They helped when he tried to drive. They didn't get lost in the pick and roll. They seemed to kind of show and then recover. I saw Derek Lively do this quite a bit. And they kept him in check, man. I mean, he couldn't get where he wanted to go. And I think that was the biggest key to this series, is just making sure that Anthony Edwards didn't get going. One thing that I did point out in the film breakdowns from game one that I think is important going into game two was the fact that Anthony Edwards tried to check Kyrie Irving, and it wore him down. Like I mean, it just wore him down because Kyrie, kind of like Steph, is just he's in a like a league of his own when it comes to conditioning and how he takes care of his body, and he just ran. I mean, he ran Anthony Edwards all over the court on the defensive end. And you could see in the fourth quarter, I mean, we heard the broadcast, I think it was Reggie Miller talking about how gassed Anthony Edwards was in the fourth quarter. And I think all that is just, it's attributed to Kyrie Irving and just running him all over the floor. On the flip side of that, I mean, who's going to guard him other than Anthony Edwards? Are they going to try to put, McDaniels on Kyrie Irving and then Edwards on Luka Doncic? I mean, Luka cooked Anthony Edwards the few times that he actually got switched onto him.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, Conley, I don't think Mike Conley can guard Kyrie Irving. So, I mean, all the matchups just they just fell into place to where the Mavericks are just in a great spot going into game two, where the Timberwolves have to make all these adjustments. And I don't know if they have the personnel to make it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And one thing you pointed out, because going into game two, if I was on the Minnesota side, one thing that you pointed out, I would be very concerned about, because at this point in the season, there's not much you can do about that. And that's the fact that Kyrie Irving seems 1,000 times more conditioned than Anthony Edwards. And it's not a knock on Ant. It's not like this guy is known for being, a out of shape player.
Yeah.
But Kyrie Irving specializes in making sure I can pick you apart in all ways, mentally, physically. And he was able to do that by just being more physical conditioned than Anthony Edwards. But how worried would you be on the other side if you were speaking to Wolves fans? How worried should they be that was a major factor and major component in game one, because Kyrie hadn't really got going from the scoring standpoint up to reaching the Western Conference Finals, and Dallas is still in it. So how concerned would you be if that's what Dallas is going to be able to do and not have to ask Luka to score 40 or ask PJ Washington to score 25, because Kyrie could just pick apart defenders because he's just more conditioned than all of them?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm a Timberwolves fan or even a Timberwolves coach, I mean, I'm terrified because you can't double team both Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving.
No.
So, I mean, the biggest issue, what we saw last series, for example, in Oklahoma City, is they double teamed Kyrie Irving because they had someone like Lou Dort who could physically keep up with Luka Doncic. And so they double teamed Kyrie. They turned him into a playmaker. I thought they did a great job forcing Kyrie basically to make plays. They didn't let him score. He had like single-digit points in 2 games. But you come into this series and they don't have a Lou Dort. And all respect to Jaden McDaniels, and I said this coming into the series, he's just not physical enough to defend Luka Doncic by himself. And one thing that I noted as we got into the pick and roll and they went into kind of their drop coverage and I covered this in a lot of the film stuff going into game 2. I mean, how are they going to defend the pick and roll? And Luka's body is just, I mean, he's so big and so strong that once he got McDaniels on his hip, there's just nothing that they could do. And so it created this advantage where they're going to have to double team Luka probably on the pick and rolls, and they don't have an answer for Kyrie Irving on the other side. I mean, they're going to have to blitz Luka. They're going to have to force the ball out, and then you're going to be in 4-on-3 situations with Kyrie Irving. And, you know, all due respect to Anthony Edwards, I mean, he's not the same build as Kyrie Irving. He's not as, you know, slight. He's not as thin. He's not as quick. And so you're putting him in an impossible matchup to keep up with Kyrie Irving all game. I mean, Conley, you know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago would be the answer. But this isn't the Conley of 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, he's an aging point guard. As good as he is on both ends of the floor, he's not going to defend Kyrie Irving. So I, as a Timberwolves fan, you don't know where the answers are coming from. I mean, I watch a lot of film. I break down a lot of games, and I can usually tell what adjustment a coach is going to make. And from Finch's standpoint, I don't know what adjustment that they can make to keep Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving in check, outside of going zone and hoping that they can stop, you know, the 3-point barrage that's probably going to come at them, and someone like Derek Lively getting in the middle of the zone, or PJ Washington. And I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I don't know if Minnesota even runs a zone. I don't know if they've run one all season, because when I looked at the film from Denver, I didn't see any zone.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what their answer is, and I'm curious to see it in game 2, because I can't think of one off the top of my head outside of just blitzing Luka and praying that Kyrie Irving doesn't torch you all night.
Yeah, and spending a Western Conference Final Series as a coach talking about, I hope we can blitz one player and pray that another player doesn't kill us, kind of tells you the situation and predicament that Dallas put him in game 1. And so, like one thing I saw, and this was just through the course of the game, was the fact Kyrie and Luka both made, whether it was McDaniels, Conley, or Anthony Edwards, they made them pay every time they decided to gamble defensively. Every time Anthony Edwards would go and gamble on that defensive stance and try and get a steal, Kyrie Irving, you know, he was too quick. Luka would use his body, spin move. Now he has Anthony Edwards on his back, and the it's 5-on-4 offense versus defense. There's probably already somebody in the corner. So now you're talking about 4-on-3, like you said earlier. From an offense-defense standpoint, I think Minnesota can fix that by like not gambling so much, but that's a habit thing. And Dallas was able to make them pay every time. I think where I watched Dallas, like they won game 1, PJ Washington didn't play the greatest.
Yeah.
And Derrick Jones Jr. didn't play the greatest. He played really good. Now, that 3-game stretch that he had against OKC in 4, 5, or 6, I didn't see that from him like to that effect in game 1, but it was pretty close. But PJ was off. Lively played amazing. I think we'll talk about that in a second with the whole Lively Gafford. It seems like Mavs fans are on 2 different sides of the fence on that one. But it just seems like the way they won, what you almost would have told me that's how they would have won all the way up to this point. The way the Mavericks won, I feel like that's how they should win. Kyrie giving you 30, Luka giving you 25 to 30 with, you know, a triple-double essentially on a night-to-night basis in the playoffs. That's the recipe they won, but that hasn't been the recipe that they get there. So from a Mavericks standpoint, how excited should you be? More so fans. We can't talk to the players and the coaches, and they can't get ahead of themselves. But how excited as a fan should you see after that output of game 1? Because we've beaten OKC. You just watched them beat them a completely different way. Kyrie didn't have to score 30. And so now that he's shown he's capable and willing to do it in order to get a victory in the series, how excited should Mavs fans be right about now after winning game 1?
Yeah, so, I mean, the number one thing that I look at is we shot, I think, 6 for 25 from 3-point range. So we made 6 3-pointers for an entire playoff game, and we won. And we scored 108 points while we did it. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think points in the paint, I think we had like 60-something points.
It was like 63 to 38, 62, 38.
Which is, and this is against a team that has 2 of the best bigs in the league. Actually, 3 of the best bigs in the league, if you count Naz Reid. Within that conversation. And so everybody thought that the front court of Minnesota was just going to dominate the Mavericks. I watched a lot of podcasts coming in. You know, I always post clips and people disrespecting basically the Mavs defense and the Mavs front court. And none of them said that the Mavs front court had a chance to slow down Naz Reid and Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. So winning that battle in points in the paint and just absolutely dominating that battle with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, I mean, that's exciting. The fact that we made 6 threes in an entire game. Kyrie didn't make a single three. I think Luka was 3 for 10, which, that's an okay game for injured Luka. Like, I mean, we feel pretty good about him going 3 for 10 and stretching the floor a little bit. But I feel great because I feel like we can play better. I feel like we didn't even play that well. And we won, and we took game 1. And Jaden McDaniels shot lights out. Kyle Anderson came in and shot 5 for 8 and knocked down a 3. We were giving him the treatment where we just leave him wide open like Josh Giddey, and that way we could help on everyone else. And he made us pay. I mean, he made 5 out of 8. McDaniels, I think, had 4 or 5 threes in the first half.
He was 3 for 3 right out the gate. Like, he had
3 for
9
3.
when Dallas had 8. Like, he had 9 points when Dallas had 8. It was 17 to 8.
And I think he's like a 33 or 35% 3-point shooter on the season. So I don't expect him to keep knocking down threes at the rate that he did. Minnesota, I think, shot 38% overall from 3. So really, I mean, I was listening to JJ Redick's podcast this morning, and he talked about how the team that wins the rebound battle has won like 80% of the games this postseason. And so the Mavericks winning the rebound battle, I think by 8 rebounds, and also the offensive rebound battle. I think that's the key moving forward. And that's where, Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford come into play. But even more so, it was PJ Washington getting on the glass and Luka Doncic getting on the glass. And it's a group effort with the Mavericks, especially, in a matchup where you're outsized like this. So I was happy we won the rebound battle. We still had more turnovers, I think 13-10 or something along those lines. So we need to clean up the turnovers just a little bit. But I feel great because I feel like we can play better. And I feel like we should have won that game by 20, if we were actually hitting the 3-pointers, and it just didn't happen for us.
Yeah, if we shot the way we did in the OKC series, game 1 would have been a statement game. It would have been 20 to 25 points. It's a statement. And the conversation around the Mavericks would have been a lot different today had they have gone 12 of 30-something for 3 instead of 6. You hit 5 or 6 more threes. I mean, you're talking about the difference of being a blowout game. So on the defensive side, we came out and it was like, let Jaden McDaniels shoot and let Slow-Mo shoot. And they was shooting. And they was hitting and they was making you pay. And it started opening up. It looked like Ant was going to be able to get going early. He had like 5 quick ones because Jay McDaniels was able to hit. Cat couldn't hit nothing to save his life, but he was getting a lot of wide open opportunities from the 3-point line early on. And he just wasn't able to hit. So like when we talk about everything that Dallas could do to clean up to win game 2, like on the defensive side, I think even early on, there were some times where it seems like we got to clean that up, but they bailed us out because Cat wasn't able to hit anything. Because if he gets going early from those wide open shots in game 2, that score looks a little bit different in the beginning of the game too on the Minnesota side. So on the defensive side, like what is it that you want to see? Because like, are we supposed to just keep kind of playing their percentages and making sure as long as Anthony Edwards, if we're going to lose this series now being up 1-0, everybody else is going to have to beat us kind of essentially, except like Cat might have to beat us from the 3-point line and everybody else is going to have to beat us but Ant, because that's what it looked like they were committed to defensively. It worked. But is there a slight concern? Like what if Ant does get going and McDaniel's able to hit like that and Cat hits those wide open threes and we end up down at an early deficit, but because of defensively you're playing the percentages, do you kind of take it game by game in a series and like you might lose 1 or 2 playing the percentages, but you win in 6, you feel great about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, so percentage-wise, so one thing I noticed that we did in the first game and going into the second game is every time Karl Anthony Towns got on the post in any capacity, even if it was the high post or out on the wing, we would double team him immediately. And I didn't expect that going into the game. I didn't even really notice it as I was watching the game. I had to go back and watch it for a second time. But we doubled Karl Anthony Towns every time he got anywhere near the post on PJ Washington. And I think PJ is the primary defender on Cat, held him to like 3 for 10. But we turned Karl Anthony Towns into a stretch 4. Like we didn't let him get in the paint. We didn't let him drive. And that was kind of the same story like I talked about with Edwards. We just seal off the paint. It's what we do. And we're able to seal off the paint because we play those percentages. So it's, Kyle Anderson might shoot 5 for 8 again. And Jaden McDaniels might make 5 threes again. but Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards aren't in the paint scoring on us consistently. And so you can't take away everything, right? You can only take away certain things, especially when you have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving on defense. I know they've stepped up in a massive way. They've been great as team defenders, but they're still not all defensive, NBA players. So you can't take away everything. You can take away, the drive from Karl Anthony Towns, for instance, the post up, and you can take away Anthony Edwards getting to the basket. And really, if Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns cannot get to the basket and they can't score and they can't drive and they can't get into the flow of the game, you're probably going to win. I mean, you might not win every game, but if you win 4 out of 6, like you said, I mean, that's all that matters. And so I think we're going to see the same coverage. I think Lively and Gafford are probably going to contest Kyle Anderson a little bit better when he's like in the top of the key area, because we gave him some wide open floaters from like 10 feet away. But as for the 3-point line, I think we're going to keep the same strategy. Credit to McDaniels. I mean, dude, he hit some of these like off of a screen. Like there was a Rudy Gobert brush screen where he was a catch and shoot 3-point guy. There was some transition stuff where he just was catch and shoot from 3. So a lot of the stuff on McDaniels was just him, I mean, turning into like prime Klay Thompson all of a sudden. And I'm okay. I don't think that's going to continue for an entire series. So if I'm Jason Kidd, I'm living with those 3-point attempts. I'm contesting Kyle Anderson a little better when he's like within the paint, because there's no reason to give him those wide open floaters from 10 to 15 feet. But if he wants to do his 8-second wind up 3-pointer, like I'm probably just going to let it happen, just like we did with Josh Giddey. I think that's the game plan, because you can't take away everything. But if you can take away the drive and Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, because that's really, I mean, that's most of their offense. That's probably 60% of their offense is Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards getting in the lane, collapsing the defense, and just kicking it out to other guys like Nas Reed for wide open threes. So I expect that to be the strategy going forward. I was really surprised in the Denver series that they double teamed Anthony Edwards almost every time he touched the ball. And I think that's why they lost that series. That's definitely why they lost game 7, is because they would collapse their entire defense onto Anthony Edwards and give the other guys a 4-on-3, and they got beat consistently and gave up a 20-point lead because of it. So right. I was shocked to see that. I was shocked that Denver didn't win the game, for one, and then I went back and watched the film, and I have no idea why they double teamed Anthony Edwards the way that they did. As good as he is and as great as he's going to be, I mean, he's 22 years old. And he's not the best playmaker in the world. I mean, he's a good scorer. He's extremely athletic. He's a good two-way player. But I think the Mavericks' philosophy is going to be, you're not going to get in the paint, and everything else we'll just live with. And if, just like the Clippers series, where the Clippers had 2 games where they shot like 60% from 3 and pushed it to 6 games, I think you're going to see the same thing here. I mean, if Minnesota goes off and shoots 60% from 3, whatever. I mean, we'll move on to the next game and we'll keep the same strategy. But the Mavericks are dictating the matchups. They're dictating the tempo. They're just in full control of everything that's going on. And if you hit enough threes to beat them, they'll live with the result. But they're not going to let your top 2 players get off and combine for 60 points and beat you. Yeah,
100%. And so in everything you said, I feel like you broke down everything for so now a casual question would be, is it shocking to kind of see that in game 1, it really realistically based on game plan, Coach Kidd outcoached Coach Finch? Like that's what it seemed like, especially from a game plan standpoint. And it seems like personnel wise, there's not much difference they can do. Is this any type of indictment on like Coach Kidd and what the great job he did in game 1? Or is this more just you got the personnel, you got the mismatches, they just got to do what they got to do? Or is this some of Kidd's philosophy as well?
So Jason Kidd, from a defensive standpoint, is probably the best defensive coach in the NBA. Mm-hmm. I stand by that. And our defense was miserable last year, but he didn't have the personnel. So you have to look at everything from a personnel standpoint. You have to give him some leeway. Last year, we didn't have any players that could play defense in the NBA. I mean, even Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving weren't playing defense in the NBA. And so Jason Kidd's philosophy and the way that he approaches the game from a defensive standpoint, it's incredible. I mean, I give him his props all the time. Defensively, I think we have the best defense in the NBA since like March 10th, something along those lines. Basically, after the trade deadline, somewhere in there after our 6-game losing streak or whatever it was. But now that he has the personnel, and he's got Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic buying in, and he's got PJ Washington coming over from a losing team and coming to his hometown and just completely buying in defensively. And you have size. I mean, he never had size. It's hard to have a good defense with Dwight Powell. Like, I mean, we did it. He did have a good defense with Dwight Powell, 2 years ago when we made the Western Conference Finals. But I think from a defensive standpoint, Jason Kidd's probably the best in the league. From an offensive standpoint, he frustrates me to no end. But you have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving to help make up for whatever Jason Kidd lacks, from an offensive mind. So,
which is kind of wild, right? Because like Jason Kidd, one of the best playmaking point guards, one of the best true point guards in the history of the NBA. But then like when it comes to coaches, sometimes you kind of question his decisions, and it's like, I think that's what burns you a little more is this is a guy who's known for his IQ when he played it, and you played point guard, and you see the game almost the way Kyrie and Luka do. And so sometimes your coaching decisions seem like you're not on the same page as your star players, and your star players are point guards. So I could see where that be the confusion, especially on the offensive standpoint of being frustrated with Jason Kidd, is that adds to your frustration when you look at who's running the offense and how come things look so like out between star player or point guard and coach when your coach is a former all-star point guard, who won a championship coaching Kyrie Irving and Luka. So I can see why it adds to the frustration on the offensive side of the ball. But like you said, you got Kyrie Irving and Luka at the end of the day to bail you out on any bad play calls or mistakes you make on the offensive side as a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just having new personnel. It's hard to implement an entire offense from the trade deadline on, because you have completely different personnel now than you did at the start of the season. So it's hard for me to judge Kidd completely on the offensive end. Defense is a little easier because it's like it's easier for everyone to buy in and for you to have a strategy. Like, I mean, last game, hey, if Kyle Anderson comes in, Lively, I want you on him. I want everyone to collapse the paint. Like, it's just a lot easier than, teaching someone to set like hammer screens and all this advanced offensive stuff, or teaching, Derek Jones Jr. when to cut on the baseline when Luka's running a pick and roll. There's just a lot more timing and a lot more aspects to the game offensively than there is defensively. So I think once we get like a full off season under our belt, like we have a young core now, we have the team that we're going to have for probably the next 3 or 4 years outside of like maybe Tim Hardaway Jr. being gone and replacing him with somebody else. So I think we're going to see, just how far Jason Kidd's mind can take us. But I've always said we should hire some kind of offensive specialist, because Jason Kidd has a lot on his plate. I mean, he's a young coach. He's learning on the job. He didn't take a bunch of assistant coaching jobs and build his way up like an Eric Spoelstra. But one thing I will say is that his talent management, I mean, the way that he manages this team, the way that he's kind of zen, like Phil Jackson used to be, I think there's a lot to be said for just the way that he manages all the talent on this team, and the way that they're playing for each other. I think a lot of that is more important than the X's and O's. I mean, we're in the Western Conference Finals. So, I mean, the best X's and O's coach in the world, say Rick Carlisle, for instance, might not have gotten us this far. Whereas Jason Kidd he has a connection with Kyrie Irving and with Luka Doncic that you can't go out and hire, and you can't teach it. It's just, they respect him, and he has the respect of the locker room. And that's really all that matters.
Yeah, 100%. So, all right. So before we close out, I want to ask you, like, okay, if Dallas wins game 2, now I say that because they would go up 2-0 while winning 2 games on the road. We just saw this though in the series in the Minnesota. Minnesota just experienced this, was just on the other side of this, but we saw that it didn't matter. It still ended up going 7. I feel like, though, if Dallas goes up 2-0 against Minnesota, like I feel like if Denver had went up 2-0 against Minnesota, that series is completely different. I don't know if they bounce back. Like they punched Denver in the mouth and that game goes to 7 because Denver's a championship team and knew how to respond. Like they're the defending champs. They knew how to respond. You should be shaking in your boots if you're a Wolves fan, because the Wolves in this version of Wolves hasn't been punched in the mouth yet. Like they've just had to respond after being up and everything like that. If Dallas goes up 2-0, like you're really going to find out a lot about kind of what you need for this team for Minnesota going forward. But how important is it for Dallas to win game 2? And what would you feel about going up 2-0 against Minnesota? Like there's a different feeling, even though you saw it from the them being up 2-0 and beating Minnesota, like you almost start to feel like, man, maybe Minnesota, if they go up 2-0, Minnesota just might not have the recipe and be built to beat Dallas. And this could be over in 5 and a lot quicker than people expected, because I think most people really rock with Minnesota in 6 or 7. So this series could be over the opposite way a lot sooner if Dallas is able to win this game tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if you go up 2-0 on the road against a young team, like Minnesota, where their star player is Anthony Edwards, who's 22 years old. It's kind of the heart and soul of their team. I don't think that they come back from that. I could see them splitting us at home and pushing it to 6. My take's always been Mavericks in 6. I think the Wolves are just too good. I think they're just too good defensively. They have too much star power with Anthony Edwards. I don't think we're going to sweep them. I think a gentleman's sweep is probably, like, it's within the realm of possibilities, but I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think the Mavs are going to hit some adversity at some point. There's just no way they're going to dog walk the Timberwolves, because they're just too. I mean, they just beat the defending champs. They're the real deal. But yeah, if you go up 2-0 on the road and then all you have to do is split at home, I mean, as a Mavericks fan, you're feeling great. I mean, win 1 of 2 at home and then close it out in 6. But it's I don't know how they're going to respond, because from just a pure X's and O's and just like a basketball mind standpoint, I don't know how they counteract Luka and Kyrie. And this is the first time the Mavericks have had that advantage, because the Clippers, they really slowed down Luka and Kyrie, and Thunder, really, they slowed down. I mean, Lou Dort was terrific on Luka Doncic. You can talk about him being over physical or tackling him or playing football you want, but they allowed it. And so it doesn't feel the same. It does. I don't see what answer Minnesota's going to have for the Mavericks star players. And so I could see it ending in 5 games, but I still think it's Mavs in 6. And I mean, we'll see. We'll see how the Wolves respond. I mean, they're at home. It's a must-win game for them, because if they go down 0-2, I think the chances of them winning the series are extremely low, because they're not the Denver Nuggets. They don't have that championship pedigree. They're not going to have the same poise if they go down 0-2 at home. So yeah, I mean, Mavs in 6 is always my pick. Even if we win the first 2 on the road, I'd still say Mavs in 6. But obviously from a rest standpoint, I mean, you can get into all this about Luka needing to rest his knees. I mean, if you win this in 4 or 5 games, I mean, how much rest could Luka Doncic get before a potential finals appearance? Would we get Maxi Kleber? I mean, there's so many elements and advantages to closing this series out faster. But 1 game, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but hopefully we can close it out faster and give our guys a break, because there's no chance that we're going to go and beat the Boston Celtics with an injured Luka Doncic. It's just not going to happen. So we need him to recover to have any sort of shot at an NBA championship. And the players know this. Kyrie, Luka, they know it. They know that they need to rest before the next series. They know if there's blood in the water, they've got to try to capitalize and win as many games as fast as possible in this series. And from a matchup standpoint, I don't know what Minnesota can do at this point to try to get the momentum back in their favor. And generally, I mean, I try to view things objectively, and from the other team's standpoint, I can usually find an answer, because I know this team better than just about anybody. I know what you can do to kind of get under their skin. But man, I don't think they have the personnel to match up with Dallas at this point.
Yeah, and I do agree, because that's what was most telling in game 1. So before we close out, game 2, does Dallas win? Does Dallas lose? Are they coming back to American Airlines Arena? Is it going to be 1-1, or are we up 2-0? I'm putting the pressure on you. I'll do it first. Dallas going to win game 2. They're coming back to Dallas up 2-0. So
I think,
take pressure off of you.
Yeah, I think 2-0. I think we're coming back home 2-0. I think the series is really going to start when we get back home. I think we're going to punch them in the mouth. They're going to have an extra 2 days to think about it, and they're going to come back here. And that's when we're going to see what the Timberwolves are made of, because it's just going to be grit. It's going to be them on the road. Luka, for some reason, plays better on the road. He's not as good at home in these playoffs. He's just I mean, he just needs the crowd against him. Mm-hmm. It's like an enabling parent. Every time I watch him at home, it's like the crowd enables him to get lost within the referees and within the physicality of the game. And they're kind of, with him. They're like, yeah, that's a bad call. Ref, you suck, all that stuff. And I think it kind of gets into the emotions of Luka, where he just kind of plays into it like an enabling parent. And when he's at home, he just kind of loses focus because the crowd's with him as opposed to against him. So we'll see when we get home. I think the Timberwolves take one from us at home at the bare minimum. So I'm really hoping that we can come back 2-0 and take 2 on the road before we get to that point and close it out in 6.
Yeah, well, that's Jericho. I'm Mo. We picked the Mavs to win, go up 2-0, bring it back to Dallas, hopefully be able to leave up out of there 3-1. We'll see what happens in game 2. Hopefully we're correct and they do go back and we'll be able to really talk great and lead up into game 3. But I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I appreciate everybody for listening. Make sure you go check out Mavs Chronicle film session. Whenever you get a chance, make sure you go subscribe to the YouTube. Make sure you go follow Jericho on Twitter and every other social media platform. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. We appreciate everybody for listening. We will catch you at the closing of game 2.